December 17, 1944. The Ardennes forest. Snow falling like ash over frozen Belgium soil. Somewhere beneath the skeletal trees, a single American paratrooper crouched in a foxhole so shallow it barely hid his silhouette. His breath came in ragged clouds. His fingers, numb, blue, clutched something that didn't belong in war. Something small. Something absurd. It was no bigger than a soda can. The Germans called it Spielzeugbomb. The toy bomb. But toys don't scream when they detonate. Toys don't turn men into vapor. And toys certainly don't decide the fate of entire battalions in the span of 3 seconds. This is the story of a weapon so unconventional, so underestimated, that even the soldiers who carried it into battle weren't sure it would work. A device born from desperation, forged in secrecy, and dismissed by officers who thought it was too small, too strange, too unlikely to matter. Until one winter morning, in the heart of Hitler's last great gamble in the West, it proved them all catastrophically wrong. 40 German soldiers. One strike. No survivors. The Battle of the Bulge was already 11 days old, and the snow had turned red in too many places. Hitler's desperate winter offensive, Operation What am Rhein, had torn through the American lines like a razor through silk. Panzer divisions surged westward. Villages burned. Entire battalions were encircled, cut off, left to freeze or surrender. The 101st Airborne Division was dug in around Bastogne, surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of ammunition. Every bullet counted. Every grenade was precious. And every man knew that if the line broke, the Germans would flood through Belgium, recapture Antwerp, and split the Allied forces in two. In the chaos, standard doctrine didn't apply anymore. Soldiers improvised. They scavenged. They took risks that would have gotten them court-martialed in peacetime. And some of them carried weapons that didn't exist in any field manual. If you haven't subscribed to the channel Battles of World War II yet, make sure to subscribe now so you don't miss our upcoming World War II videos. The M1A1 Beano grenade was never supposed to see combat. Officially, it had been cancelled. Quietly shelved. Deemed too dangerous, not to the enemy, but to the men who would throw it. Its design was radical, almost childish in its simplicity. A hand grenade shaped like a baseball, weighted to match, meant to be thrown overhand with the same motion every American kid learned in a sandlot. The theory was elegant. American soldiers grew up playing baseball. German soldiers didn't. Therefore, Americans could throw farther, faster, more accurately. The Beano would give them an edge. But the reality was darker. The fuse was impact-based. The grenade exploded on contact, no delay, no timer. Which meant if you fumbled the throw, if it hit a tree branch, if it ricocheted off a wall or clipped your buddy's helmet on the way out of the trench, it detonated immediately. In training, men died. Not from enemy fire. From their own grenades. By late 1943, the U.S. Army had officially discontinued the Beano program. Thousands of units were destroyed. The rest were locked away in depots, stamped with warnings, forgotten. But war doesn't care about paperwork. By December 1944, the front lines were collapsing. Depots were raided. Experimental weapons were pulled from storage. Officers looked the other way. And a small number of Beano grenades, maybe a few dozen, maybe 100, found their way into the hands of paratroopers who were desperate enough, or crazy enough, to use them. One of those men was Private First Class Daniel Kessler, 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. Kessler was 22 years old, born in Brooklyn, raised on stickball and street fights. He'd lied about his age to enlist in 1942, survived jumps over Normandy and Holland, and earned a reputation as the kind of soldier who didn't flinch when the mortars came in. But he wasn't fearless. He was just good at hiding the fear. On the morning of December 17th, Kessler's squad was ordered to hold a frozen logging road 3 miles east of Bastogne. Intelligence reported a German mechanized column moving through the area, half-tracks, supply trucks, maybe a few tanks. The orders were simple: delay them. Bleed them. Buy time for the surrounded garrison. Kessler's squad numbered 9 men. They had 2 Browning automatic rifles, a scattering of M1 Garans, and maybe 30 rounds per man. No anti-tank weapons. No artillery support. No air cover. The sky was too thick with snow and cloud for planes to fly. And Kessler had 1 Beano grenade. He didn't remember where he'd gotten it. Maybe scavenged from a destroyed supply truck. Maybe handed to him by a sergeant who didn't know what else to do with it. It sat in his jacket pocket like a secret, or a curse. "You gonna use that thing?" his squad mate, Corporal Eddie Rourke, had asked him the night before. Kessler had shrugged. If I get close enough. Close enough to what? A tree? You throw that wrong and it'll take your head off. Then I won't throw it wrong. Rourke had laughed, bitter and cold. Yeah. Sure. The German column appeared just after dawn. Kessler heard them before he saw them, the grinding growl of engines, the crunch of snow under heavy treads. He pressed himself flat against the frozen earth, breath held, heartbeat hammering in his skull. Through the trees, shadows moved. Dark shapes. Men in field gray uniforms, rifles slung, marching in loose formation alongside the vehicles. They were moving fast, confident, unafraid. Why would they be afraid? They'd been winning for 11 days straight. Kessler counted them. 30 men. Maybe more. Too many. His squad leader, Lieutenant Mathis, made a hand signal, hold fire. Let them pass. But Kessler knew what that meant. If they let the column through, those Germans would reinforce the units besieging Bastogne. More men. More guns. More pressure on a garrison that was already on the brink of collapse. If they engaged, they'd be slaughtered. If they did nothing, they'd lose the war. Kessler's fingers closed around the Beano grenade. It was cold. Smooth. Almost comforting, like holding a baseball before a pitch. He thought about Brooklyn. About summer evenings on the corner of 5th and Union, throwing fastballs at a chalk square on a brick wall. He'd had a good arm back then. Good enough to dream about the majors, before the war came and turned every dream into smoke. He didn't tell Mathis what he was planning. He just moved. Low and fast, Kessler slipped out of the foxhole and belly-crawled through the snow, using the trees for cover. The Germans were 20 yards away. Then 15. Then 10. He could hear their voices now, guttural German, laughter, someone complaining about the cold. They didn't see him. The column had stopped. A half-track had gotten stuck in the snow, wheels spinning uselessly. The soldiers clustered around it, shouting orders, pushing, trying to free it. 40 men. Maybe more. All packed together in a space no bigger than a tennis court. Kessler rose to one knee. He pulled the pin. He threw. It was a perfect strike. The Beano grenade arced through the gray morning air, spinning, sailing, impossibly precise. It cleared the low-hanging branches. It passed over the heads of 3 German soldiers who never looked up. And it landed, smack, in the center of the group, right at the base of the half-track's rear wheel. The impact fuse triggered instantly. The world became light in sound and pressure. The explosion ripped outward in a sphere of molten steel and fire. Bodies were lifted off the ground and thrown like ragdolls. The half-track's fuel tank ruptured, and a secondary blast turned the vehicle into a fireball. Men screamed, brief, raw, cut short. Others ran, burning, only to collapse into the snow. In 3 seconds, 40 German soldiers ceased to exist. Kessler hit the ground as debris rained down around him, shrapnel, metal fragments, pieces of things he didn't want to identify. His ears rang. His vision blurred. For a moment, he thought he was dead. Then Rourke was dragging him back toward the foxhole, shouting something Kessler couldn't hear. The German column was gone. Just smoke and fire and silence. And in Kessler's hand, still warm from the throw, was the ghost memory of a baseball. The aftermath was chaos dressed in silence. For 10 full seconds, nothing moved on that frozen logging road. Smoke coiled upward from the wreckage of the half-track, black and greasy against the pale December sky. The smell hit next, burning rubber, scorched metal, something worse underneath that none of the Americans wanted to name. Kessler lay flat in the snow, chest heaving, ears still ringing from the blast. Around him, his squad mates stared at the carnage with expressions caught between awe and horror. Lieutenant Mathis was the first to speak. "What the hell did you just do?" Kessler didn't answer. He wasn't sure he could. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer kinetic memory of the throw. It had felt right. Natural. Like every game of stickball in Brooklyn had been training for this single moment. Corporal Rourke slapped him on the shoulder, hard enough to hurt. "You just wiped out half a damn company with a baseball grenade. You know that, right?" "It's called a Beano," Kessler muttered. "I don't care if it's called the holy hand grenade of Anch, that was the craziest thing I've ever seen." But Lieutenant Mathis wasn't smiling. He scanned the tree line, jaw tight, eyes sharp. "They're going to send more. A blast that big? Every German within 5 miles heard it. We need to move. Now." He was right. Within minutes, the forest came alive with the sound of engines and shouted commands. Somewhere to the east, whistles blew. Orders were barked in clipped German. The Americans could hear them, "Vorwärts. Schnell. Schnell, the unmistakable sound of reinforcements mobilizing. Kessler's squad pulled back into the deeper woods, moving in silence, leaving no tracks where they could help it. The snow was both a blessing and a curse. It muffled sound, but it also recorded every step. They moved in single file, rifles ready, breaths held. Behind them, the burning half-track sent a pillar of smoke into the sky, a beacon. A warning. A declaration. Word of the strike spread faster than the men who'd witnessed it. By nightfall, every paratrooper in the 101st Airborne had heard some version of the story. A private from Brooklyn had taken out an entire German platoon with a single grenade. No, it was a whole company. No, it was a battalion. The details mutated with each retelling, growing more mythic, more impossible. But the core truth remained: one throw. One weapon. 40 dead. And the weapon? A grenade that command had officially declared too dangerous to use. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the besieged 101st, heard the report while standing in a frozen farmhouse basement that doubled as his headquarters. He was exhausted, 11 days of siege, constant bombardment, supply lines cut, no reinforcements in sight. He just sent his famous one-word reply to a German surrender ultimatum: nuts. And now this. A Beano grenade. McAuliffe repeated, as if testing the words for sanity. Yes, sir, said the intelligence officer, a young captain with frostbitten fingers. Private Kessler, 502nd PIR. Single throw. Direct hit. Wiped out a German mechanized unit on the Marche Road. McAuliffe stared at the map on the table in front of him. Bastogne was a red circle surrounded by blue arrows, German forces closing in from every direction. Every road, every forest path, every approach was contested. The Germans had tanks, artillery, air support when the weather cleared. The Americans had barbed wire, frozen foxholes, and stubborn courage. And now, apparently, toy grenades. How many Beanos do we have? McAuliffe asked. Unknown, sir. Maybe a dozen. Maybe fewer. They were pulled from a depot outside Reims before the offensive started. No official record of distribution. McAuliffe nodded slowly. He didn't like improvisation. He didn't like experimental weapons. But he liked losing even less. Find them, he said. Find every Beano grenade we have. And find me the men who know how to throw. Kessler didn't sleep that night. He sat in a foxhole with Rourke and 2 other privates, sharing a can of cold beans and half a cigarette. The temperature had dropped below zero. The wind cut through their uniforms like knives. In the distance, artillery rumbled, German 88s pounding the American lines, steady and relentless as a metronome. You think they'll come for us? Rourke asked, voice low. Who? The Krauts. After what you did. Kessler shrugged. They were coming anyway. Yeah, but now they're mad. One of the other privates, a skinny kid from Ohio named Halloran, spoke up. You think that grenades curse it? What? The Beano. I heard stories. Guys in training blew themselves up with those things. Threw 'em wrong, hit a branch, boom. Dead. Kessler didn't answer. Halloran kept talking, nervous energy spilling out in words. I heard they stopped making 'em because they were killing more of us than them. I heard. Shut up, Halloran, Rourke said, not unkindly. But Kessler was already thinking about it. The weight of the grenade in his hand. The perfect arc of the throw. The way it had exploded exactly when and where it needed to. Luck? Skill? Or something else? The Germans didn't wait long to respond. 2 days after Kessler's strike, a Wehrmacht intelligence officer named Hauptmann Ernst Vogel stood in the ruins of the destroyed convoy, boots crunching on frozen ash. He was part of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, tasked with cracking open Bastogne and finishing the American resistance once and for all. Vogel was methodical. Cold. He examined the blast pattern, measured the crater, inspected the shrapnel embedded in the trees. He spoke to the survivors, 3 men, horribly burned, barely coherent. One of them kept repeating the same phrase, Es kam aus dem Nichts. Why ein Baseball? It came from nowhere. Like a baseball. Vogel frowned. German soldiers didn't throw grenades like baseballs. They threw them stiffly, awkwardly, with poor accuracy. It was a known disadvantage. The Americans, by contrast, had grown up with the motion, overhand, fast, precise. But this? This was something else. Vogel retrieved a fragment of the grenade casing from the snow. It was small. Lightweight. The fuse mechanism was crude, almost primitive, impact-based, no timer. Dangerous to the user. Unpredictable. And devastatingly effective. He stood in the center of the blast site, turning slowly, counting the bodies. 42 men. One explosion. Fogel was not a superstitious man. He didn't believe in wonder weapons or secret technologies. But he understood psychology. He understood fear. And he understood that if the Americans had more of these weapons, if they could deliver strikes like this at will, the siege of Bastogne would become exponentially more costly. He radioed his commanding officer. "We need to accelerate the assault. The Americans have a new weapon. Small. Portable. High lethality. If they deploy it en masse, we risk significant casualties." The response was curt, "Then don't give them the chance." Back in the American lines, Kessler was summoned to Lieutenant Mathis's foxhole. Mathis handed him something wrapped in canvas. Kessler unwrapped it. 3 more Beano grenades. "They found a crate," Mathis said. 8 grenades total. "McAuliffe wants them used. Strategically. Not wasted." Kessler stared at the small, innocent-looking spheres in his hands. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. You proved it works. Now we need to prove it works more than once." "And if I throw wrong? If it hits a tree?" Mathis met his eyes. "Then you die a hero. But right now, we need heroes more than we need caution." Kessler looked at the grenades. Then he looked at the sky, gray, heavy, endless. "Okay," he said. The next 72 hours became a game of shadows and calculated violence. Kessler and 5 other soldiers, handpicked for their throwing arms, were formed into a makeshift unit with no official designation. No insignia. No place in the command structure. They were given one objective: disrupt German advances using the remaining Beano grenades. Hit supply lines. Ambush patrols. Create chaos. Make the enemy afraid of the forest itself. Their first mission came on December 20th. Intelligence reported a German ammunition convoy moving south along a frozen creek bed, heading toward the front lines. The convoy was lightly defended, maybe a dozen soldiers, 2 trucks, no armor. Under normal circumstances, the Americans would have let it pass. Engaging it would reveal their positions, draw retaliation, cost lives. But these weren't normal circumstances. Kessler's team moved through the forest like ghosts. They'd stripped off anything that made noise: canteens, dog tags, loose gear. They moved in absolute silence, communicating with hand signals, breathing through their noses to avoid steam clouds. The creek bed was narrow, hemmed in by steep banks on both sides. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Kessler took position on the high ground, concealed behind a fallen oak. Below, the German convoy rumbled into view: 2 Opel Blitz trucks, canvas-covered cargo beds, soldiers marching alongside with rifles slung. They were cold. Tired. Talking among themselves. They had no idea. Kessler waited until the lead truck was directly below him. Then he threw. The Beano grenade dropped like a stone and detonated on impact with the truck's hood. The blast shredded the engine block, ignited the fuel tank, and turned the cab into a fireball. The driver didn't have time to scream. The second truck slammed on its brakes, skidding sideways in the snow. German soldiers scattered, shouting, trying to locate the source of the attack. But the forest gave them nothing, just smoke and shadows and the echo of the explosion rolling through the trees. Another paratrooper, Private Halloran, threw the second Beano. This one landed in the bed of the second truck. The cargo was ammunition. The explosion was biblical. A chain reaction tore through the truck's payload: mortar shells, rifle rounds, stick grenades, all detonating in a cascading roar that split the truck in half and sent shrapnel screaming in every direction. 3 German soldiers were killed instantly. Others staggered, bleeding, deafened, blind. Kessler's team didn't stay to watch. They melted back into the forest, moving fast and low, leaving no trace. Behind them, the convoy burned. The psychological impact was immediate. Within 48 hours, German patrols in the Bastogne sector began moving differently. Slower. More cautiously. They avoided choke points. They scanned the tree line constantly. They flinched at every sound. Hauptmann Fogel noticed. He stood in the command tent of the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, studying casualty reports by lantern light. 2 convoys destroyed. 15 men dead. 30 wounded. And in each case, the same pattern: sudden, precise strikes from concealed positions. Small explosions. Maximum lethality. "They are using ambush tactics," one of his junior officers said. Fogel shook his head. "No. Ambush tactics require volume. They're using precision. Then what do we do? Fogel stared at the map. Bastogne sat in the center like a splinter, small, stubborn, infected. Every attempt to dig it out had cost blood and time. And now the Americans had a weapon that turned their weakness into strength. We stop reacting, Fogel said. We force them into the open. The German counterstrike came on December 22. A full-scale assault on the southern perimeter of Bastogne. Panzer tanks. Volksgrenadier infantry. Artillery barrages that turned the snow black in the air into fire. The Americans were pushed back, yard by yard, foxhole by foxhole. Men died in waves. Ammunition ran out. Medics dragged the wounded through the mud while machine gun fire ripped overhead. Kessler's unit was thrown into the line. They were given a position near a bombed-out farmhouse, tasked with holding a section of trench that overlooked a frozen wheat field. If the Germans took the field, they'd have a clear line of advance into the town. If the Americans held it, they'd buy another day. Kessler had 2 Beano grenades left. He crouched in the trench with Rourke and Halloran, watching the gray shapes of German infantry emerge from the smoke. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Moving in textbook formation, staggered lines, suppressing fire, advancing by sections. They're coming right at us, Halloran whispered, voice shaking. Yeah, Kessler said. I noticed. Rourke checked his rifle. We're not gonna hold. We don't have to hold. We just have to slow them down. With what? 2 grenades. Kessler looked at the Beano in his hand. Small. Insignificant. A toy bomb. Yeah, he said. With 2 grenades. The German advance reached the center of the field. Kessler waited until they were 50 yards away, close enough to see faces, to hear the crunch of boots on frozen ground. He rose from the trench, arm cocked back, body moving on instinct and muscle memory. He threw the first Beano. It sailed through the air, high arc, perfect rotation, and landed in the middle of a German squad. The explosion tore through them like a scythe. Bodies fell. The advance faltered. But only for a moment. The Germans kept coming. Kessler threw the second grenade. This one landed near a Panzer tank, not close enough to destroy it, but close enough to kill the infantry squad moving beside it. The blast knocked 3 men off their feet and sent shrapnel ringing off the tank's armor. The tank commander buttoned up, lost visual contact with his infantry, stopped advancing. The attack stalled. Not broken. Not defeated. But slowed. And in a battle like Bastogne, where every minute mattered, slow was enough. That night, Kessler sat in the farmhouse ruins with his back against a shattered wall, too exhausted to care about the cold. Rourke sat beside him, silent, staring at nothing. You're out, Rourke said finally. Out of what? Grenades. Beanos. Whatever. You're out. Kessler nodded. So what do we do now? Kessler didn't answer. But somewhere in the distance, he heard the sound of engines. American engines. The 4th Armored Division was coming. Patton's tanks were smashing through the German lines, racing north to relieve Bastogne. The siege was almost over. Almost. Hauptmann Fogel stood on a ridge overlooking the burning field, watching his men retreat. He'd lost 60 soldiers in the assault. The Americans had lost fewer than 10. And all because of a weapon the size of a baseball. Fogel lit a cigarette, hands trembling, not from fear, but from rage. He'd underestimated them. Underestimated their ingenuity. Their desperation. He wouldn't make that mistake again. But as he turned to leave, he heard the distant rumble of American armor. And he knew. The war had turned. Not because of tanks. Not because of air power. But because of a toy bomb that wasn't a toy at all. December the 26th, 1944. The sky over Bastogne finally broke open. For the first time in 2 weeks, the clouds parted, revealing a pale winter sun that glinted off the snow like broken glass. And with the clear skies came salvation. Wave after wave of C-47 transport planes, their bellies pregnant with supplies, ammunition, medical gear, food, hope. Parachutes blossomed over the frozen town like flowers in a graveyard. But the siege wasn't over yet. The Germans, sensing their final opportunity slipping away, launched one last desperate assault. Everything they had left. Every tank. Every man. Every shell. It was a gambler's final bet, all in, no reserves, win or die. And Kessler's unit stood directly in their path. The attack began at dawn. Artillery hammered the American lines, 105mm howitzers, Nebelwerfer rocket launchers, the shrieking moaning minis that turned the air into a symphony of terror. The ground shook. Trees exploded. Men pressed themselves into frozen mud and prayed the next shell would miss. Then came the tanks. Panzer IVs. Stu-G3 assault guns. Grinding forward through the smoke, main guns booming, machine guns chattering. Behind them, waves of Volksgrenadier infantry, hundreds of men in field grey coats, moving like a flood. Kessler was out of Beano grenades. But he wasn't out of ideas. Lieutenant Mathis gathered what remained of his platoon, 23 men, many wounded, all exhausted, in the cellar of a half-collapsed barn. The walls shook with each artillery impact. Dust rained from the ceiling. Outside, the sound of tank treads grew louder. "They're going to overrun us," someone said. A young private, barely 18, voice cracking. Mathis didn't sugarcoat it. "Probably. But we're going to make them bleed for every inch." Kessler stood near the back, arms crossed, face unreadable. He'd been silent since throwing his last Beano the night before. Rourke had asked him twice if he was okay. Both times, Kessler had just nodded. But inside, his mind was racing. No more Beanos. No more precision strikes. But the lesson of the Beano wasn't the weapon itself, it was the principle. Small. Fast. Unexpected. Delivered with accuracy. He looked around the cellar. At the men. At their weapons. At the supplies scattered across the dirt floor. And he saw it. "Lieutenant," Kessler said. Mathis turned. "What?" "I've got an idea. It's insane. But it might work. Everything we've done for 2 weeks has been insane. Talk." 15 minutes later, Kessler stood on the edge of the barn's collapsed roof, arm cocked back, holding a standard-issue M2 fragmentation grenade. Not a Beano. Just a regular pineapple grenade. But he was throwing it like a baseball. Below, 3 Panzer tanks rumbled through the snow, turrets rotating, searching for targets. Infantry moved in their wake, tight formation, disciplined, deadly. They were less than 100 yards away. Kessler pulled the pin. He threw. The grenade sailed through the air, not as far as a Beano, not as accurate, but far enough. It landed 10 feet behind the lead Panzer, in the middle of an infantry squad. The explosion killed 4 men and wounded 6 more. The Germans scattered, confused. They hadn't seen where the throw came from. The barn was a ruin, they didn't expect resistance from a pile of rubble. Kessler dropped behind cover as machine gun fire raked the roof. Halloran was beside him, breathing hard. Did it work? Barely. But it worked. We've got 8 grenades left. Then we throw 8 grenades. For the next 40 minutes, Kessler's platoon became a phantom, striking and vanishing, throwing grenades from impossible angles, using the rubble and smoke for cover. They didn't stop the assault. They couldn't. But they slowed it. Every grenade forced the Germans to take cover. Every explosion broke their momentum. Every delay gave the defenders more time to reposition, to dig in, to call for support. And support was coming. From the west, the unmistakable roar of American armor, Sherman tanks, M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, half-tracks loaded with infantry. The 4th Armored Division had broken through the German encirclement. Patton's spearhead had arrived. The Germans heard it too. Hauptmann Vogel, crouched behind a knocked-out Panzer, felt the shift in the air before he heard the engines. He'd been a soldier long enough to recognize the sound of a battle turning. The Americans weren't retreating. They were counterattacking. He grabbed his radio. "All units, fall back. Fall back too." A grenade landed 3 feet away. Vogel threw himself sideways, rolled, felt the blast wave punch the air from his lungs. Shrapnel whined past his head. When he looked up, half his squad was down. And standing on the roof of the barn, silhouetted against the pale winter sky, was a single American soldier, arm cocked back, holding another grenade. Vogel didn't wait to see where it landed. He ran. By noon, the German assault had collapsed. The tanks withdrew. The infantry retreated into the forest. The artillery fell silent. And from the west, the lead elements of the 4th Armored Division rolled into Bastogne. M4 Shermans plastered with snow and mud, crews grinning, waving, firing celebratory shots into the air. The siege was broken. Kessler sat on the ground beside the barn, too tired to stand. His arm ached. His shoulder felt like it had been dislocated and snapped back into place. He'd thrown 11 grenades in under an hour, more than any human arm should be able to handle. Rourke dropped down beside him, handing him a canteen. "You okay?" Kessler drank. "Define okay." "You just threw us out of a siege with a bunch of regular grenades and a baseball arm." "Yeah, well. Didn't have a choice." Halloran appeared, grinning like an idiot. Mathis says you're getting a medal. I don't want a medal. Too bad. You're getting one anyway. Kessler looked at the bodies scattered across the snow. German and American, mixed together, indistinguishable in death. We didn't win, he said quietly. We just didn't lose. Rourke clapped him on the shoulder. Brother, in this war? That's the same thing. 10 miles away, Hauptmann Fogel sat in the back of a retreating half-track, face blank, mind numb. They'd thrown everything at Bastogne. And they'd failed. Not because of tanks. Not because of artillery. But because of a handful of American soldiers who could throw farther, faster, more accurately than any Wehrmacht soldier ever could. He thought about the Beano grenade. The toy bomb that wasn't a toy. And he realized, it wasn't the weapon that mattered. It was the man who threw it. The winter sun hung low over the ruins of Bastogne as the final German forces pulled back beyond the horizon, leaving behind a scarred and silent battlefield. The snow, once pristine and white, was now stained with oil, ash, and blood. Smoke rose from shattered vehicles and collapsed buildings, curling into the pale sky like the ghosts of men who would never go home. But Bastogne still stood. The siege that was supposed to break the American resistance, the linchpin of Hitler's last gamble in the West, had failed. Not because of overwhelming force or superior numbers, but because of stubborn courage, desperate ingenuity, and a handful of soldiers who refused to surrender. Among them was Private First Class Daniel Kessler, who had turned a discarded experimental weapon into a legend. In the days following the relief of Bastogne, the story of the Beano grenade spread through the ranks like wildfire. Soldiers who had never heard of the weapon suddenly wanted to know everything about it. Officers requested reports. Intelligence units scrambled to locate additional stockpiles. Journalists, hungry for heroes, began asking questions. But when they came looking for Kessler, they found a man who didn't want to talk. He sat in a tent near the outskirts of the town, cleaning his rifle in silence while medics worked on his right shoulder, dislocated from the strain of throwing grenades for hours. His arm was in a sling. His eyes were distant. A correspondent from Stars and Stripes approached him, notebook in hand, eager smile on his face. Private Kessler? I'd like to ask you a few questions about the grenades you... No, Kessler said, not looking up. But the story is incredible. The men are calling you a hero. They're saying you... I said no. The correspondent left. Rourke, sitting nearby, shook his head. You know they're going to write about you anyway. Let them. You don't care? Kessler finally looked up. I care about the guys who didn't make it. The ones who didn't get to throw anything. Who just took a shell or a bullet and died in a frozen hole in the ground. They're the story. Not me. Rourke didn't argue. The official U.S. Army report on the Beano grenades used during the Bastogne siege was filed in March 1945. It was 6 pages long, written in dry, bureaucratic language, and concluded with a single recommendation: further evaluation of the M1A1 Beano grenade is warranted, pending review of safety protocols. That review never happened. By the time the report reached the Ordnance Department, the war in Europe was nearly over. The Beano program remained officially discontinued. The remaining grenades were destroyed or lost to history. No further units were manufactured. But the legend endured. Veterans of the 101st Airborne who fought at Bastogne told the story for decades afterward, in VFW halls, in letters home, in quiet conversations over whiskey and cigarettes. They told it to their children. Their grandchildren. And every time, the details shifted a little, but the core remained the same. A soldier from Brooklyn. A toy bomb. One perfect throw. 40 Germans dead. Hauptmann Ernst Vogel survived the war. He was captured by American forces in April 1945, held in a POW camp in France, and eventually repatriated to Germany in 1947. He never spoke publicly about his experiences at Bastogne. In private letters uncovered years later, he wrote only one line about the Beano strikes. We underestimated not the weapon, but the will of the men who wielded it. He spent the rest of his life as a school teacher in Bavaria, teaching history to children who had never known war. He died in 1982, age 71, in his sleep. Daniel Kessler returned to Brooklyn in November 1945. He was awarded the Silver Star for his actions at Bastogne, though he never wore the medal. He worked as a mechanic, married a girl from the neighborhood, raised 3 kids. He coached Little League Baseball for 27 years. He never talked about the war. Not to his wife. Not to his children. Not to the reporters who occasionally tracked him down, hoping for a quote, a story, a piece of history. But on quiet nights, when the city was asleep and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic, he would stand in his backyard and throw a baseball against the brick wall of his garage. Over and over. The same motion. The same arc. The same precision. And every time, he remembered snow and smoke and the weight of something small and deadly in his hand. The Beano grenade is almost completely forgotten today. It doesn't appear in most textbooks. It isn't displayed in military museums. There are no monuments, no memorials, no plaques commemorating the men who used it. But in the archives of the 101st Airborne Division, buried in boxes of old reports and faded photographs, there is a single black and white picture taken on December 27, 1944, the day after Bastogne was relieved. It shows a group of soldiers standing in the snow outside a ruined barn. They are smiling, exhausted, filthy, half-starved, but smiling. In the center of the group is a young man with his arm in a sling, squinting at the camera, looking uncomfortable. That man is Daniel Kessler. And in his good hand, barely visible, is a baseball. The Battle of the Bulge raged for another month after the relief of Bastogne. It was the bloodiest battle fought by American forces in World War II, over 89,000 casualties, nearly 20,000 dead. But Bastogne held. And in holding, it became a symbol. A symbol of resistance. Of courage. Of ordinary men doing extraordinary things with whatever they had. The Beano grenade played only a tiny part in that story. A footnote. A curiosity. But for the men who were there, the men who saw what one soldier with a good arm and a desperate idea could do, it was something more. It was proof that wars are not won by wonder weapons or unstoppable armies. They are won by individuals. By decisions made in frozen foxholes. By throws made in the face of overwhelming odds. By men who refuse to quit, even when the world is burning down around them. Kessler died in 1998, age 76, surrounded by his family. His children found a small wooden box in his closet after the funeral. Inside was the silver star he'd never worn, a faded photograph of his squad, and a single, battered baseball. They never learned where the baseball came from. But they kept it. And years later, when his grandson asked about the war, about what Grandpa did in the Battle of the Bulge, Kessler's daughter handed the boy the baseball and said, "He saved a lot of lives with this." The boy didn't understand. But one day, he would. The lessons of the Beano grenade echo far beyond the snows of Bastogne. It reminds us that innovation is born from desperation. That the weapons we dismiss as too strange, too risky, too unconventional are sometimes the ones that change everything. That courage isn't about overwhelming force, it's about using what you have, where you are, with everything you've got. And it reminds us that heroes don't always look like heroes. Sometimes they're just kids from Brooklyn with good arms and bad odds, standing in a frozen forest, holding something small and impossible, and deciding to throw it anyway. Because in the end, that's what war is. Not tanks. Not planes. Not grand strategies. It's one moment. One decision. One throw. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the world. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video.